The sun had barely risen over the training field when the recruits were already lined up for morning PT, their breath heavy in the cold air, their uniforms damp with sweat and exhaustion, lingering from the endless drills of the previous day. But in the far corner of the formation stood one recruit who did not join them, a young woman named Harper, who remained still with her arms folded and eyes sharp as if she were studying the others instead of participating. And the moment the instructors noticed her absence from the exercise, the mocking began, whispers spreading like wildfire through the line, calling her lazy, weak, undeserving of the uniform, and even the sergeants exchanged glances filled with irritation because no recruit was allowed to skip PT without a medical reason, and yet Harper stood there calm and unbothered, as if the rules did not apply to her, and this only added fuel to their anger as the tension grew thicker in the air like a storm about to break. But Harper did not flinch, and deep within her eyes there was something unreadable, a depth that none of them could understand. And that mystery only made the others hate her more, as if her silence was a challenge they were eager to crush. And still she said nothing as the first command of the day echoed across the field, leaving everyone wondering how long she could defy the system before it crushed her completely. But little did they know the system itself was not ready for what she was hiding beneath the surface, and soon the truth would shake them all to their core. The drill instructor stormed toward Harper, his boots pounding the ground like thunder as the recruits watched with anticipation, hoping to see her get punished, humiliated, or even expelled because in their eyes she was making them all look bad by refusing to participate. And the instructor's voice roared as he demanded to know why she was standing still, and Harper simply replied that she had permission. Her tone calm and controlled, and this only enraged him further because no recruit had the nerve to speak to him so casually, and he grabbed her file from the assistant instructor, flipping through the pages with growing frustration, only to find nothing but standard information. No medical exemption, no special orders. Nothing to justify her behavior, and the recruits smirked, certain that this would be the moment she finally broke. But Harper just stared back at the instructor unafraid, as though she had faced far worse than anything this base could offer. And the instructor stepped closer, his face inches from hers, daring her to explain herself properly, but she remained silent. And in that moment, a strange tension filled the air like electricity building before lightning strikes, and even the instructor hesitated for a breath as if something about her stare unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. Yet his pride would not allow him to back down, and he raised his hand ready to issue punishment, when an unfamiliar voice cut through the air, commanding him to stop, and turning every head toward the figure approaching from the far end of the field, with an authority that silenced the entire base in an instant, leaving everyone stunned because only someone of immense rank could halt a drill instructor mid-order, and the question of who this person was hung heavy in the air, waiting to be answered in the next heartbeat. The recruits straightened instinctively as the figure drew closer, revealing the insignia of a high-ranking officer, a colonel whose presence alone made every soldier stand taller and breathe quieter. And the colonel's eyes swept across the field, sharp and calculating, before locking onto Harper with surprising intensity, as if he already knew who she was, even though they had never met. And he asked the instructor why Harper was being confronted, and the instructor explained the situation, his tone laced with frustration, yet controlled in the presence of higher authority. And to his shock, the colonel did not react with anger, but instead looked at Harper with a strange expression, almost like recognition or perhaps disbelief, and the recruits exchanged confused glances, wondering why the colonel seemed more curious than furious, because any other recruit would have been punished harshly for such behavior. But Harper's face remained calm, her posture unbroken as she met the colonel's gaze without fear, and the colonel stepped closer, studying her closely, as if searching for answers in her eyes, and the instructor shifted nervously beside them, waiting for the colonel's verdict. But instead of addressing the instructor, the colonel spoke directly to Harper, asking her one simple question. A question that made the air grow colder, and every recruit lean forward subconsciously because the tone he used was not one of interrogation, but one of testing, and everyone could sense that something about this moment was far more significant. Then a skipped PT session as the colonel waited for her response, and the silence that followed felt heavy like the moment just before an explosion when everything holds its breath and the recruits could feel that something was about to happen, that none of them were ready to understand. Harper did not look away. She did not shrink under the colonel's gaze. Instead, she lifted the sleeve of her uniform slowly and deliberately, revealing a mark etched into her skin. A mark shaped like a coiled serpent. Its scales stylized, its fangs exposed, a mark unlike anything the recruits had ever seen. And the moment the colonel saw it, his eyes widened with shock and recognition, as if he had just witnessed a ghost from the past, and the entire field fell into stunned silence because even though the recruits did not know what the mark meant, they could feel the weight of it, the danger, the authority, the power that radiated from it, like an aura. And the colonel took a step back, his usually composed demeanor cracking ever so slightly as he whispered words that made the instructor freeze in place. Words that confirmed the mark belonged to a unit so elite, so classified, that even speaking its name was forbidden the Black Ops Division. A group known only in rumors, the kind of soldiers who completed impossible missions and vanished without trace, the kind of operatives who were both feared and respected by the highest levels of command. And suddenly everything made sense. Why Harper did not fear punishments, why she did not need validation from anyone, why she stood apart from the others, because she was not just a recruit, she was something far more dangerous and far more important, and the recruits stared at her with wide eyes. As the colonel slowly turned toward the instructor, his expression dark and apologetic, and he opened his mouth to speak. But before he could, the ground suddenly vibrated beneath their feet, as distant explosions echoed across the base, signaling an emergency that none of them had been warned about. And as alarms began to blare through the air, the colonel's gaze snapped back to Harper with urgency, because whatever was coming, he knew she was the only one who might be able to stop it. But the real question was whether she was willing to step back into the shadows of the life she had tried to leave behind. And the answer to that question would determine the fate of everyone on this base, as the chaos crept closer with every second. And Harper's eyes narrowed as she prepared to speak, leaving everyone breathless as they waited to hear what she would say next. Whispers spread across the base like wildfire as everyone questioned how Mia managed to walk past them like a ghost, while skipping PT without consequence, and some believed she had dirt on someone high-ranking, while others thought she was simply arrogant, but none of them understood the way she moved with effortless precision, as if every step was measured, and every glance calculated, and Reese could not shake the feeling that Mia was not just another soldier, because something about her posture, her silence, her cold, sharp eyes made him uneasy. Even though he tried to laugh it off with the others, he still felt that strange tension in the air, and it only grew stronger when the morning formation was called, and the colonel himself arrived early with a stiff expression that hinted he already knew more than he was letting on, which made everyone stand a little straighter while wondering why the atmosphere suddenly felt heavier than usual, as if something dangerous was creeping closer with every breath. As Mia stood in her place, calm and unbothered, the sergeants exchanged irritated looks because they were tired of her skipping the mandatory PT sessions while everyone else bled through workouts and drills, yet she never faced any punishment, and today they were determined to make an example out of her, and Reese smirked as he prepared his remarks, thinking he would enjoy tearing her apart in front of the entire unit, while proving that nobody was above the rules. But the moment he opened his mouth, the colonel raised a hand, stopping him cold, which made Reese freeze in disbelief, because the colonel never interfered in disciplinary matters at this stage, and his silence stretched as he stared at Mia with an unreadable expression that made several soldiers shiver, even though no words had been spoken. Yet the air felt like static before a storm, as if something powerful was about to snap. The colonel took a slow step forward, and the entire formation felt the weight of his gaze as it traveled across every face before returning to Mia, who did not flinch and did not speak. If she was waiting for something to be acknowledged, but Reese, who was standing next to her, felt his skin crawl because he could feel her presence like a blade pressed lightly against his neck, and he had no idea why it felt this way. But still, he tried to salvage his pride and spoke up loudly, complaining that Mia never attends PT and makes the rest of them look weak, while the colonel listened without reacting, and when Reese finished, several soldiers nodded, expecting the colonel to unleash punishment at last. Yet instead, the colonel asked a single soft question. "Do you know who she is?" And the way he asked it made the entire formation go silent, because his voice was not angry, it was borderline cautious, which made their hearts pound uneasily as they realized this was not a normal situation at all. Nobody answered because nobody actually knew Mia's background, which suddenly felt more terrifying than they ever imagined, as the colonel stepped closer to her, with a strange gentleness reserved only for the highest levels of respect, and he asked Mia to show them why she had been granted exemption from PT, and everyone frowned confused, because what could she possibly show them that would justify months of special treatment? But without a word, Mia reached up and rolled her sleeve, slowly revealing the inside of her forearm, and the second that ink appeared etched into her skin. Every breath in the formation stopped because it was not just a tattoo, but a symbol that only appeared in classified documents connected to missions that never existed officially, and some soldiers instinctively took a step back, while others whispered in horror because they recognized it as the snake mark of a Black Ops operative, a designation given only to elite assassins who operated in complete silence and were considered living weapons, and the colonel's eyes hardened as he turned to the stunned unit preparing to reveal the truth. They were never meant to hear. Reese felt his body go cold as he tried to speak, but his voice caught in his throat, because he finally understood that every time Mia skipped PT, it was not because she was lazy, but because she was already beyond their level in every possible way, trained to kill in environments none of them could survive, and used as a strategic asset in missions that governments denied existed, and his mind raced as he replayed every insult, every joke, every careless remark he had thrown her way, wondering how he was still alive after disrespecting someone like her, while the other soldiers stared at Mia with a mixture of fear and awe, unsure of how to react to someone so dangerous, yet standing calmly among them like an ordinary recruit. And just before the colonel explained Mia's role in the most secretive unit on Earth, a distant alarm suddenly echoed through the base, signaling an unexpected emergency that none of them were prepared to face, as the ground trembled beneath their boots, leaving them on edge with no idea that this was only the beginning of something far bigger than any of them could imagine. The sirens wailed across the base like a beast roaring awake, and the ground trembled with each pulse of the alarm, causing soldiers to scramble in confusion as officers shouted orders while trying to figure out what triggered the alert, and Reese felt his heart hammering as he turned toward Mia, who still stood motionless, her eyes narrowing, as if she already knew what was coming before anyone else could react, and the colonel snapped into command mode, ordering the unit to battle positions while demanding real-time updates from the control room. But the comms flickered with static, and faint voices could be heard panicking in the background as they mentioned an unidentified breach somewhere near the restricted sectors, which immediately sent chills through everyone who heard it, because restricted sectors were sealed by multiple layers of security, and nothing was supposed to be able to penetrate them without high clearance. Chaos erupted as soldiers rushed through corridors grabbing gear and preparing for engagement, but while everyone else moved frantically, Mia walked with calm precision, like someone who had trained for moments like this, her footsteps silent, her presence unnerving, and Reese found himself following her instinctively without even knowing why, because something about her steadiness amidst the Panic made him believe she understood exactly what they were dealing with, and as they rounded a corner heading toward the central hub, a deafening explosion rocked the east wing, shaking the walls and shattering glass, while screams echoed down, the hallways creating a wave of terror that made even the bravest falter, as thick smoke began to spread through the vents, carrying the scent of burning metal and blood. The colonel barked commands through the comms, trying to regain control of the situation. But before he could finish his sentence, a second blast tore through a reinforced door, sending fire down the hallway like a dragon's breath, while soldiers threw themselves to the ground to avoid being incinerated, and Reese looked at Mia, who did not even flinch as she stared toward the flames, with an icy expression that made him feel like she was seeing something beyond the smoke, something hidden, something dangerous. And then the emergency lights flickered, turning the corridors blood red as the base system screamed from overload, causing the sound of grinding metal to echo through the structure as if the entire base itself was in pain. The colonel regrouped with a team in the command center where screens were flashing, with corrupted data windows glitching and maps distorting, making it nearly impossible to track enemy movements. And when the tech officers managed to restore partial visuals, they froze as the feeds showed masked intruders moving through the base, with flawless coordination, taking down defenses without hesitation, and bypassing security like they had the blueprint of the facility memorized, which could only mean one thing: someone from the inside had given them access, and the colonel's jaw tightened as he realized this was not an attack. This was a surgical strike, and their enemy was calculating, relentless, and terrifyingly efficient. Mia arrived at the command center, followed by Reese, and the moment she stepped inside the room, fell silent as soldiers moved aside, unconsciously making space for her, while the colonel turned to her with grim understanding, because he had once seen the aftermath of her missions and knew she was their best chance at survival. So he asked her, directly, "What do you see?" And Mia studied the screens with razor focus, pointing out patterns in the enemy movement that nobody else noticed, identifying flanking routes and predicting their next target with unsettling accuracy. And Reese watched, in awe as she dismantled the chaos into structure, as if her mind was a weapon sharper than any blade, and the colonel nodded, trusting her judgment instantly, telling the command staff to follow her tactical plan without question, which caused several officers to glance at each other nervously, unsure why a so-called recruit was suddenly giving orders. But when Mia spoke, her voice was steady, cold and lethal, as she declared that the intruders were not random mercenaries, but part of a covert strike. Group trained for infiltration, sabotage, and extraction, the kind used by black market intelligence networks who sold war to the highest bidder, and her words hit the room like thunder, because it meant this attack was tied to something far larger than their base, something buried deep in global power struggles. And Reese felt his skin prickle as he wondered how Mia knew so much about them, until the colonel revealed the truth to the stunned room that Mia was not just a soldier, but a former top-tier Black Ops operative who had gone off the grid after missions, so classified, even he did not know the full details, and every head snapped toward her in disbelief, because now everything made sense. The air turned heavy as the realization settled in that the only reason the enemy had not already wiped them out was because they did not know Mia was here, and she was their trump card, their silent weapon, their final line of defense. And Reese felt a mix of fear and awe as he watched her move toward the exit, preparing to intercept the enemy before they reached the core of the base, while the colonel assigned him and a small team to follow her lead, which made him both honored and terrified, because following Mia meant stepping into a battlefield unlike any he had seen before. And as they armed up and sprinted through the smoke-filled corridors, the sounds of gunfire and collapsing metal grew louder with every step. When they reached the breached sector, the sight before them was brutal walls, scorched bodies scattered, and automated turrets destroyed with surgical precision, and Reese gritted his teeth as the metallic taste of fear filled his mouth. But Mia moved like a phantom, gliding through debris, her eyes scanning, every angle with deadly calculation, as if she could sense danger before it appeared, and she suddenly raised a hand, signaling the team to stop moments before a silent figure emerged from the shadows, aiming a weapon at them. And in a blur of motion, Mia vanished from sight, reappearing behind the intruder, snapping his neck before he could even pull the trigger, leaving the soldiers frozen in stunned silence as they realized she was operating on a level of lethality that defied comprehension. Reese stared at her back as she continued forward without hesitation, and he knew that whatever waited deeper in the base was far more dangerous than anything they had faced so far. But he also knew that he could not turn back, because something inside him had shifted the moment he saw the snake mark on her arm. Something that told him she was not simply a warrior. She was a force of nature, and the enemy had just made the worst mistake of their lives by stepping into her domain as the distant sound of heavy doors unlocking echoed through the corridors, signaling that the intruders had reached the final sector, leaving Mia and her team with no time to waste as they prepared to face an unknown adversary who held secrets that could shatter everything they thought they knew about loyalty, identity, and war. And the deeper they went, the more Reese felt that the true nightmare had only just begun. The deeper they pushed into the heart of the base, the more the air felt heavy with silence, not the natural kind, but the kind that came before death, and Reese could feel his pulse pounding in his ears as the flickering red lights painted the walls like blood, while every shadow seemed alive and hungry. Yet Mia moved with the graceful precision of a predator gliding through darkness, her senses razor-sharp, as if she could hear the enemy breathing through concrete, and the team followed her with growing unease, because they had seen her kill without hesitation. But there was something in her eyes now, something colder, quieter, something that made even fear step aside and wait its turn as they approached the final security barrier, only to find it already hacked open with surgical precision. And that alone told Mia everything she needed to know, because this was not just an enemy strike. This was a message aimed at her. The colonel's voice crackled through the comms demanding status updates, and Mia answered in calm, measured tone, explaining that the enemy had already reached the inner sector, but she intended to intercept before they accessed the classified vault. And the colonel trusted her completely, but Reese could hear the tension in his voice as he warned them to be careful, because the deeper they went, the more likely it was that the enemy had prepared traps and ambushes, knowing that anyone talented enough to pursue them this far would be extremely dangerous, and Mia simply acknowledged before cutting the channel, which surprised Reese since she rarely showed emotion. But something about this mission was personal to her, and he wondered what connection she had to this place or to the enemy as silence filled the corridor once more. They advanced with weapons raised, scanning every inch of the dark hallway until they reached a junction where the floor was scorched with fresh blast marks, and the ceiling tiles lay shattered on the ground as if a bomb had gone off recently. Yet there were no bodies, no shell casings, no signs of struggle, which made it even more unsettling, because it meant the fight moved quickly without hesitation, without mercy. And as they crouched to examine the damage, Mia knelt down, running her fingers across the debris before pausing on a small shard of metal etched with a symbol that made her eyes narrow slightly. And Reese noticed the subtle change in her posture, like her spine straightened and the temperature in the air dropped as she whispered a name that nobody else recognized. But the way she said it made their skin crawl, as if she had just spoken the name of a monster she once fought in the dark. Before anyone could ask questions, a slow, echoing clap broke the silence, and they spun around to see a tall figure stepping out of the shadows, wearing tactical armor that did not belong to any known military unit, his face hidden behind a mask painted black, and his footsteps eerily calm, as if he had been waiting for them. And Reese felt his throat tighten as the figure stopped a few meters away, speaking in a smooth, amused tone that felt like poison dripping from every word, as he greeted Mia like an old acquaintance, calling her by a code name she had never spoken out loud at the base. And Reese realized, with dawning horror that this enemy knew her far too well, possibly better than anyone else in the world, and the tension in the air crackled like lightning, waiting to strike. Mia's expression remained unreadable, but Reese, who had been near her long, enough sensed a subtle shift in her aura, like the calm before a storm. And the masked man chuckled as he taunted her, reminding her of missions they once shared, of blood they spilled, of secrets they buried, while the soldiers around her glanced, nervously unsure how to process the fact that their quiet, mysterious teammate had once fought side by side with this nightmare standing before them. And the masked man spoke of a time when Mia was not just an operative, but the deadliest weapon. The Black Ops division ever created before she vanished from the shadows, leaving behind unfinished business that had now returned to claim her. And Reese felt his fists clench as the truth unfolded in front of them like a blade sliding across their throats. The masked man motioned to the side, and more intruders emerged from hidden passages surrounding them with silent precision, each one heavily armed and genetically synced to combat formations that were nearly impossible to counter, with standard tactics. But Mia did not flinch. Instead, she raised a hand signaling her team to stand down, which startled Reese because surrendering made no sense until he noticed that Mia was not looking at the enemies around them. She was staring directly at the masked man with a gaze cold enough to freeze bone, and in that moment he understood that she was not submitting. She was isolating her true target. And the masked man seemed to realize it too, because his amused tone softened into wary respect as he acknowledged her strategy while reminding her that her team would die if she made the wrong move. And Mia simply whispered, "Then you should worry more about your men than mine." Before the masked man could react, Mia vanished from sight, moving with speed beyond anything Reese had ever seen, as she blurred through the air, striking down 3 operatives in the span of a heartbeat, and chaos erupted as gunfire exploded through the corridor. But Mia was already weaving through, bullets like water slicing through steel, while her team scrambled for cover, firing at targets she left vulnerable in her wake. And Reese felt adrenaline burn through his veins as he followed Mia's rhythm, using her movements as a guide to predict enemy positions. And for the first time he realized she was not just lethal. She was orchestrating the battlefield like a symphony of destruction, turning terror into precision and fear into strategy. The masked man leapt into the fray, engaging Mia. Directly their clash shaking the ground as their blows collided with the force of steel on stone. Each strike filled with years of history, rage, and betrayal, and Reese could only watch in stunned silence as he witnessed a war between legends unfolding. In the dim red lights, while the rest of the team struggled to survive the onslaught of highly trained operatives who moved like machines, but even they could not maintain formation under Mia's relentless dismantling of their coordination, and soon the corridor became a battlefield of broken bodies and shattered weapons. Yet the masked man remained standing, matching Mia strike for strike, as if their strength and skill were mirrors of each other. They fought with deadly grace each movement, precise each counter flawless, and Reese could tell this battle was more than physical. It was personal. A collision of past and present that could not end without blood, and the enemy leader spoke between blows, accusing Mia of abandoning the unit, of betraying the cause, while Mia countered with cold fury, telling him that their unit had gone rogue, that their missions were no longer about protecting stability, but about manufacturing chaos for profit. And Reese felt sick as he realized the truth behind her words, that the Black Ops unit had once been an invisible shield, but had become a weapon for corrupt power brokers manipulating wars from the shadows. And now the masked man represented that darkness, while Mia stood against it. The fight escalated as the masked man triggered a hidden device, causing the floor beneath them to shift, revealing a deeper chamber where the classified vault was located, and he retreated into it, daring Mia to follow as the door began to close. But Mia surged forward, and Reese with no hesitation dove after her just before the heavy blast door sealed with a roar, locking them inside the unknown darkness, while the echoes of battle faded on the other side, leaving Reese breathless and disoriented. In the pitch-black chamber, as he realized he was now trapped in the final layer of the enemy's plan, alongside the most dangerous woman he had ever met. And the enemy who knew every shadow she once walked through. And he could feel the tension rise as the masked man's voice echoed through the darkness, promising that everything they thought they knew was about to be shattered, as the true purpose of the attack began to reveal itself piece by piece like a blade sliding through the dark, poised to strike at the very heart of their world with no warning of the nightmare waiting beyond the next breath under the blazing afternoon sun. The training ground buzzed with tension as every soldier held their breath, watching her stand there, calm and unshaken. The colonel narrowed his eyes, demanding answers, but the serpent mark on her arm spoke louder than any words his memories flashed of classified missions, whispered legends, and men who vanished trying to uncover the truth she was. Not just a soldier. She was a ghost from the Black Ops shadows the very unit commanders feared to even mention. Her silence was more dangerous than any weapon, and the colonel realized he had judged someone far beyond his understanding. The squad looked at her with awe, fear, and respect, as the air thickened like a storm ready to break. But before anyone could speak, distant alarms echoed across the base, signaling an unexpected breach. Chaos erupted as orders were shouted and soldiers scrambled for formation. Yet she did not flinch. Instead, she stepped forward with purpose, her eyes focused like a predator, her voice cold and steady as she said, "Stand down and follow my lead," because whatever was coming, she had faced worse and survived. But the true danger had not even revealed itself yet.